When I was first setting up my Notion workspace back in 2018, it was Tiago Forte's para method that helped me give my workspace some much needed structure. At the time, I was taking his Building a Second Brain course, which is awesome, and it really helped clarify some ways of thinking about the data. If you're a Notion user, you probably know that Notion is not terribly opinionated about where you actually store your information. So you yourself need to give it structure in order for it to be helpful and useful. So Para is essentially a tool-agnostic system for organizing all of the information in your life. Para stands for Projects, Areas, Resources, and Archives. Now, Tiago has recently released his new book on the Para method, so I thought it might be good to dive into how we actually apply Para inside of Notion and what are some of the key challenges that pop up and how we've adapted it to our complex workspace. We get asked questions all the time about Para and how to apply Para in Notion. I think one of the most common reasons that people get really tripped up in Para is when they take it way too literally. You don't have to translate Para exactly one-to-one inside of Notion because it's just a different tool. It's a more dynamic application. It doesn't work like a Finder window on your computer where you're moving files into one specific place. So let's start with the P in Para, which is for projects. And Tiago defines projects as a goal with a deadline. It's something that you're actively working on. It's short-term efforts in your work or personal life that you take with a certain goal in mind. Areas are essentially areas of responsibility or standards to maintain over time. They're important parts of our life or work that require ongoing attention. This tends to be in the realm of daily habits and meaningful rituals. Resources are things that you save related to a range of topics that you're interested in or rabbit holes that you're going down, things that you're curious about, inspired by, and learning about. And the final A is for archives, which are inactive items from the other three categories. These are things you might want to save for future reference, even though they're not necessarily related to something active currently. So when we want to save something, we have an idea, a piece of information, or something that we want to store, we ask ourselves, where does this live? So Notion databases add this layer of complexity that mean we have to adapt Para to Notion's unique features, functionality, quirks, and limitations. There are some things that you can't quite do in Notion, so it might require some workarounds. Let's take a look at a flowchart that's adapted from Tiago's book to look at where does something go when you're saving it into Notion. Now, again, this is customized to our specific setup, but I just want to show you an example of how you don't need to interpret Para so literally when we're talking about Notion. This is based on Tiago's original chart that has a number of questions to help you discern where should something be saved. So the first question to ask is it an appointment or a meeting? If the answer is yes, in our case, this gets saved to a calendar app, Google Calendar, Cron, whatever you're using. We have a Zapier automation set up so that anything that is saved to our Google Calendar automatically gets sent into our Actions database. Inside of our Actions database, we keep all time-based events and tasks. If it's not an appointment or a meeting, we ask, is it a task? If yes, it goes into the Actions database. If no, we ask, is it a discussion or a decision that needs to be made? I've talked about this in other videos before about how we use a tensions database as a team to resolve tensions asynchronously, kind of in place of Slack, really. Tensions are basically anything that's a decision, a question, something that helps us move projects forward. And the idea is that when a tension is resolved, usually there's some kind of next action, and so that will get added to the Actions database. The question of if something is a discussion or a decision is not in the Para framework. Is tensions an area? Is it a project? Is it a resource? It's kind of none of them. It's just part of what helps us get our work done, and that spans all projects. It also spans all areas. So there are certain databases in Notion that don't necessarily fit neatly into one of these categories, and that's okay. So we just have slightly more complex needs, and we've adapted our Notion as such. So let's say it's none of those things. We can ask, is it a note or an idea? If it is a note or idea, depending on the context of the note or idea, we send this to a different database. So we ask if the idea or note is related to specifically content creation, we will save that into the content database. The content database is basically our editorial calendar. It's where all ideas for content that we produce get stored and saved with a status, an author, an intended publish date, etc. If the note is related to a specific person, we can add that to the person's profile inside of the people database. If it's something else, if it's just a note that we're creating, a thought that you had that you don't want to forget, that just goes into the notes and ideas database. Now, again, some of these databases blur the lines between what is a project, what is an area, and even what is a resource. For us, people and notes and ideas are part of the Knowledge Hub, which is part of our resource stack. The content database supports content creation as part of our marketing activities. So you could say marketing is an area, but we have regular projects and activities that we do every single week as part of that area. So the content database supports projects, it also supports areas. And so it can get a little bit blurry, but that's okay. The point is that we have these databases that are very context specific that allow us to get our work done. In a way, the power of databases make it so that it doesn't really matter whether or not it's an area or a project. All that matters is that metadata is connected, that the content database can relate to a project, it can relate to next actions, and it can relate to any resources and assets required to complete that project. So if it's not a note or idea, is it a piece of information, a resource, or reference material? If it is one of these categories, we can kind of further go down the chain and say, yes, in general, most things are going to get saved into the library database. Any online courses that I'm taking, PDFs that I save, interesting articles that I'm reading, all of that stuff gets saved into the library database. We also have some other nuances and things like using the Readwise automation. I really like Readwise as a tool. I use their Reader app, and so I can save things to read later, and it gets saved into Readwise, and it provides an inbox, and then I can go through and decide, do I want to save this to Notion? Do I want to move it into the library? Or do I just want to leave it into the Readwise library? If it isn't information, resources, reference material, etc., it's worth asking, does this really belong in Notion? So this is a really adapted flowchart of kind of how I think about that para breakdown in the context of Notion. A lot of this, again, is based on workflows and ease of use of finding information. It's not a one-to-one mapping of the categories of para. So again, para was a loose inspiration, and we've adapted it to some of the way that Notion interprets data and allows us to move data around the space and works with some of the permissions limitations as well. Tiago recommends regularly moving things between different categories depending on whether or not they're actively supporting a project, an area of responsibility, or needing to be shared. Again, this works when we're talking about folders, but in Notion, grouping things into databases is what really allows us to supercharge our workflows. But we can't easily move items between databases without losing that beautiful metadata. Let's take a look at an example project page in Notion. So here we have a project that's got all sorts of different metadata available. If I were to move this item into a different folder, archive folder, a resource folder, or something like that, we're going to lose all of this beautiful metadata. So that means any relations that I've associated with this project and anything that kind of gives it that richer context gets lost, which is really the beauty of Notion. So the idea is that we can assign different departments, we can assign resources to this, and we can change the status of the project to make it archived. We don't need to actually physically move this piece of data or information. So again, para is really open to interpretation. Now, in the context of teams, Tiago recommends having a personal para and a team para, which is fine in theory, but that can get really complex when you have small business owners that are trying to manage both their work and personal in the same Notion workspace. Do you need two resource hubs, or are you saving the same information twice? It starts to get a little bit tricky. Notion does also have certain limitations when it comes to sharing and permissions. So we usually start with access first in terms of that being the primary consideration, because database access is all or nothing. You can't just give partial access to database views. It's probably one of Notion's most hotly requested features that makes things challenging when you're trying to bring in non-Notion users into your workspace. So here are some of the ways that I adapt para for a complex Notion context. I'm an owner of the account. The majority of projects and actions for the account are for a work context. All of my personal areas are also managed through this account. We manage our family and household activities from this workspace as well, with shared pages that are visible only to my husband and I. So here's how it looks in more detail. The projects aspect of para in Notion relies on two databases, the projects and the actions. You can also integrate a goals database, but we're not going to get into that. That's a rabbit hole for another day. But basically, the projects database is probably one of the most utilized databases in the workspace. It's the lifeblood of our team workspace, and everybody has access to that database. That projects database has a two-way relation to the actions database. So projects are basically how we group tasks and events together inside of Notion. All projects have actions to move them forward, and all actions are associated with a project. Everything in your life is a project. So nearly everything should be added into this database as a project. Our project database has properties like owner, start and finish dates, scope, which is basically how resource intensive or time intensive is this project, a department associated with it, design, HR, operations, client services, etc. A priority, which gets reviewed and adjusted weekly, any sub-projects that might be associated with this project, which is a self-relation to the projects database. So this allows us to have a parent-child relationship with projects. A goal database, which is basically the bigger goal that that project supports. The actions database, which is all related tasks and events required to complete the project. A status property helps us understand what status the project is in, if it's active, ongoing, completed, archived, etc. And then a little place to add status updates, which is just a text field so that the owner can update the project weekly as part of our weekly review. And this helps us see at a glance what's happening with that project. The actions database includes all tasks, to-dos, events, etc. And that's essentially your to-do list. So generally speaking, all actions should be associated with a project. So the projects aspect of Para is really projects and actions working together as two databases. So let's dig into areas. Areas are interpreted pretty liberally in our space. So here's how I think about it. My personal areas are unique dashboards inside a personal dashboard in a private section of my workspace sidebar. Using Notion's wiki feature, I converted this dashboard into a wiki page, which kind of allows me to have the design that I want while also switching into an index mode that gives me a listing of all of the databases inside of that page. It's totally optional to do this. Before the wiki feature was launched, these areas were just pages inside of my personal dashboard. They're not connected to any of the other projects and tasks or anything like that. They are standalone dashboards that are just for that one specific context. I like to tuck all of those source databases that are related to those areas into a toggle at the bottom of the page. I like to call that the data basement. And you can see there's all sorts of interesting databases in there that don't really relate to other parts of the workspace that are more team-oriented. Now, of course, lots of these life areas do have projects and actions associated with them, and I still want to be able to manage those, but I don't want to clutter up our team shared databases. So what do? Inside of the shared projects database, I have 3 projects which are for my personal use, and they are projects with a status of ongoing. They don't have a nice tidy start and finish date the way most projects do. They are basically ongoing projects that never really end. So I have this catch-all project called Life Admin, and that's where I can put all of my personal tasks. Now, the nice thing about Notion is you can scope out access to certain items inside of a database. So even though the projects database is shared with the team, I can say I only want Life Admin to be visible to Ben and I. That means our other team member will not see this page in the database. Then I have Health and Wellness, which is a project for any health and wellness related activities, softball games, spa day, doctor's appointments, etc., things like that. Personal development is a project for tracking all notes and actions and things related to any kind of personal development initiatives, courses I'm taking, books I'm reading, etc. You could, of course, lump all of those together into a life admin if you wanted to keep it simple. It's really up to you. So by creating projects for these areas, I'm able to utilize all of the properties from the project database structure while still using the status property to mark the project as ongoing. That kind of allows us to blur the line between projects and areas. Is it a project? Is it an area? It doesn't really matter. All that matters is I'm able to generate actions related to that so I can maintain those standards or get those projects done. So hopefully you can see how you don't really need to be so rigid with the different categories of Para. For us, it's all about ease of use, access to the information, and ability to generate new tasks quickly as needed. So we've got personal areas, and then there are areas that are shared. So one example of this is household management. And so because Ben and I are both owners of this team account, as well as a cohabiting couple, we have a team space for our household that is visible just to the two of us. So any household projects, activities, resources, things that we're saving, inspiration for house projects, all of that gets saved into the household area, and it remains completely separate from all other parts of our workspace. So technically this is an area, but it lives in the sidebar as a team space because it's a shared area. And this is just one of the easiest ways to maintain this area. Food is also a big part of our household activities, so a custom dashboard is there called Food HQ that lives in the sidebar for quick and easy access. It's got stuff like a pantry manager, recipes, groceries, tips and tricks, cooking videos that I've saved, etc. So everything household and food related all lives in that part of our Notion workspace. And the reason it's separate is it's such a different context that I would use and access that information. I'm not usually accessing household stuff during the weekday when I'm doing work stuff, and vice versa. I don't really need access to those sorts of things while I'm day to day getting my work done. So those contexts can be very separate. I don't need to worry about relations between those different databases. It's pretty rare that I need information to overlap between those different contexts. So we've got personal areas, we've got shared areas, and then we have team areas, which we basically refer to as departments. So we have a database called departments, which essentially represents our team areas. So I kind of use departments and areas interchangeably. All projects are related to one of these departments. Each of these departments is basically a unique dashboard that displays all of the projects, actions, resources, etc. related to this department. We can also include any unique source databases. So one example would be our marketing and sales page is a dashboard that has the content database featured front and center. It has links to a media kit, marketing analytics, case studies, etc. So how we feature and design the marketing and sales page, it's going to look different than another department that doesn't need that same data. If we open the client services department, that's going to feature the people database at the top, or consulting pipeline, quick links to our consulting offer pages. Every single department page is designed to optimize for the most frequently performed workflows and the most accessed resources within that department. So as I mentioned before, for resources, we don't just see resources as topics of interest the way it's explained in the Para book, but it's more a team knowledge base for all of our reference materials, research, notes, ideas, assets, swipe files, and even people. Anything that we reference as examples and inspiration gets collected in one of the key databases in that section. Now, for the most part, the library is the catch-all database for pretty much everything that we're saving as reference. So unless it's something specific like a quote that I want to save or a swipe file, pretty much it almost always goes into the library. By streamlining your workspace into a few core databases, you make it easier to relate information together. So for example, projects database is connected to the library. That means every project can quickly and easily reference things that you've saved to the library. If you have 10 different resource databases, you're going to need a number of different connections to the project. It gets harder to maintain all of that. So the more databases you have, the more likely you are to struggle to answer the question, where do I save this? So for us, library creates this catch-all database that most things can get saved to, and that is seen as a resource or a reference that supports our projects. The archives part of Para is actually really straightforward. Projects get archived when they're no longer being worked on, and you do that by changing the project status to archive. There's no need to move the project into a different folder. There's no need for archive-specific folders. It's just so easy to change a project status to archive. And then all of that historical context related to the project gets saved and can be referenced later easily. One of the reasons that historical context can be really helpful is if you do similar projects over and over again, it's really nice to go back to old projects and reference previous actions, time estimates, how many calls were done, etc. And it can help improve your estimation of future projects. So this is the Para adaptation that's worked for our workspace for quite a few years. I haven't made a ton of major changes to the structure in a very, very long time. So as an advanced user, I'm able to carefully mix, private and shared data across different databases. It's not necessarily the best or only way to set things up. I wrote a more in-depth article about this with some screenshots. You can read it on the Notion Mastery blog. And if you have questions about it, post your questions below. Notion is powerful, but it has its quirks and it requires a lot of know-how in order to apply Para effectively, especially if you are mixing personal and private information with team shared information. Making things feel simple and easy to use in Notion from a workflow perspective is complex. Notion's features and functionality mean endless opportunities and customization when it comes to how you structure your data, but if you don't have experience with systems design, user interface design, or user experience design, it's really easy to make a mess of things. This is one of the many reasons that I created Notion Mastery, because it's not just about mastering the tool, but it's about developing systems thinking and organizational principles that influence the way that you work. So if you want to become a more thoughtful designer of your daily workflows and how you move through Notion, definitely check out the course. We'd love to have you in there. And of course, if you want to learn more about Tiago Forte's work, you can check out his new book, The Para Method, or check out his online course, Building a Second Brain. I know Tiago wrote the book and sort of developed the method with the intention that it's meant to be flexible. So don't be afraid to adapt it to your needs, take what works, and leave the rest. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you do have specific questions about how I apply Para or how you might approach something in Notion, definitely drop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.